So we have really big breaking news and actually really rough news to share, but very important news to share, which is really about the fact that President Donald Trump has now officially implemented and announced a lot of his next stage of his plans when it comes to doing tariffs. He is now planning to do reciprocal tariffs, or has already done reciprocal tariffs by the time you are watching this video, if you're watching this in the future. And the big idea is that a lot of the numbers, they are very devastating. While every single person is still in this video, these are essentially the numbers that he wants to essentially implement on all of the major countries that he has planned. You guys can look at the screen for yourself, but I'll read a couple of them. The big ones is that in China, they're going to be tariffing China at 34%. In Europe, it's going to be at 20%. In Vietnam, it's going to be at 46%, which is pretty crazy. And I think it's the largest one of all the countries mentioned. In Taiwan, it's going to be 32%. And you can basically read all the numbers, the rest of the numbers on the screen right here. But the idea really behind this, I think it's also really important to mention, is that all of the numbers that you just see right now on the screen, they are the percentage of tariffs that are going to be applied on top of the already existing tariffs, which basically means that, for example, and I'm just using this as an example, if China, or just say a certain country, had a 15% tariff, and on the screen right now that same country you see has a 30% tariff, then what this means is that that 30% tariff is going to be in addition to what already exists inside of our economy or inside of our world right now. So in other words, that 15% tariff would now become a 45% tariff if you see a 30% on the screen. In other words, it's stacking. And I think that this is to give you perspective about how really rough and really extreme the situation is right now. So the big idea is that in today's video, what I really want to talk about is really just giving a background story to what's happening right now inside of our world, our economy, when it comes to Trump's tariffs. We do have a lot of new announcements to be able to share, so I think it's going to be important to really understand what's happening, because a lot of the stuff that we talk about is going to impact a lot of areas in our economy. For example, if you are someone that happens to be unemployed, or you're looking to advance in your career right now, it is definitely going to impact the job market. It is most certainly, and already has been, impacting the stock market. It is going to have a role in the housing market. It is definitely going to have a role in inflation. So everything when it comes to like our daily lives, prices, inflation, housing, jobs, the stock market, investments, everything in that world in our daily lifestyle, it is going to be impacted. And I think that this is why we have to talk all about this in today's video. So of course, with that being said, now that you guys have the background information, let's get right to this video. But as always, if you guys enjoy videos like this, like, comment, subscribe. If you guys want to share support, it's up to you guys, but it is always greatly appreciated. And with that being said, feel free to leave a comment about personal thoughts at any time throughout this video, and let's get started. So to give you guys, maybe to start with a little bit of a background story of what's happening inside of our world right now, is that essentially it really started on April 2nd of 2025, which he basically calls Liberation Day. And essentially what this is, that on that specific date, he basically made a lot of announcements when it comes to what he wants to do when it comes to Trump's reciprocal tariffs. He updated a lot of his plans. He announced what he wanted to do. He announced those specific numbers that we just shared on that specific date, and it led to a very massive reaction with stocks on the following day, on April 3rd of 2025, which basically continued the crash into April 4th of 2025. So basically right around the release of this video. Now currently at this time, one of his announcements is that there's going to be a universal 10% baseline tariff on all countries, even countries that don't typically do trade with America. He wants to essentially create a tariff on every single kind of trade or every single kind of product that enters into our country. What the percentage of the tariff is going to be dependent a lot on the specific country, as well as the specific category of the product that we're talking about. So for example, one of his newer plans is, that we recently learned about, is that he wants to do a 25% tariff on all automobiles, cars, and everything in the automotive industry. In other words, if you are someone that is trying to import goods from foreign countries related to automobiles, anything from car parts to the car itself to everything in that world, well, there is going to be a 25% tariff, like just mentioned. And again, it's important to notice is that all of these tariff numbers, all of these numbers when it comes to tariffs are stacked. So they mean that the percentage that you see, they're in addition to what already exists. Now, the prediction to what's going on into the terms of what's likely to happen in the future is that on the foreign country side, it is expected that most foreign countries are going to or have actually already begun to retaliate by doing their own version of tariffs as well. So there is a massive, massive trade war right now going on where we have Trump announcing his tariffs, foreign countries announcing their tariffs, Trump backfiring with more tariffs, and now foreign countries expected to come out with even more tariffs as well, which is crazy to see what's going on. I'd love to hear your personal thoughts if you guys have any about the situation because it is very crazy what's happening. Now, the idea really is that one thing that we do notice is that President Trump did come out to say that he is very much open to negotiations. So that is one thing that's I don't want to say good or bad, but let's just say that there's some hope that he may change course because he is open to negotiating a lot of his policies and he's open to talk and he's open to conversation. We don't know how strict he will be and whether or not he's going to pull through and change courses, but at least at this current time, one thing we can say is that he is open to talking, he is open to negotiations, and he has actually already begun to do some of these negotiations in a lot of the foreign countries that we're talking about, especially in China, Mexico, and Canada. And I only listed those three specific countries because China, Mexico, and Canada are the three countries that are some of the biggest importers when it comes to America or when it comes to working with America to import goods. So I think that that's the reason why it's really important to understand what's specifically happening in all of these countries right now in our world. It was already considered a shock that he even implemented these tariffs to begin with because there were a lot of people, and that's why I think it's really important, and maybe feel free to share your thoughts, but there were a lot of people from news articles to economists to even YouTubers, other YouTubers that you might have seen, that really thought that he was potentially bluffing when he announced these tariffs during the first wave in the beginning about 1 to 2 months ago. A lot of people thought that this was going to be a thing where maybe he just started to announce tariffs, but then he was going to bluff and then afterwards just call back a lot of his plans. But the reality is now that we are in the future and we're talking and we know what happens, he wasn't bluffing. He really did implement a lot of his tariffs. Now, it is very possible that maybe going forward into the future, he still can technically retract and take back a lot of his tariff policies anytime. But at this current time, at the making of this video, it looks like he is pressing forward to implement even more tariffs than what's going on. He is going to be announcing even more categories of products. So for example, I've heard that semiconductors, chips and parts in that world, they are going to be receiving some kind of tariff as some kind that hasn't been announced yet but is expected to be announced relatively soon. Of course, that part is related to the future, so we don't know what it is, so hence maybe if you guys haven't done so already, consider subscribing because we will be giving more updates if that video does come out in terms of what he ends up doing in the future. So just something to maybe consider subscribing about if you guys want to. But the idea is now maybe to turning to maybe talking a little bit more about what are the different areas of life that will be impacted by a lot of his tariff policies. And the first part that we really have to talk about is going to be the stock market. Now, the stock market, obviously, most people already know by now, is that it reacted really negatively. A lot of stocks are retracting back to their original levels about 1 to 2 years ago. Most stocks, more or less, if not basically almost every single stock in the stock market, suffered a very, very massive crash that ranged from just a little bit of a crash to a very severe crash, talking about 10+% percentage points in their stocks. So this is very, very brutal, and we have not seen such a downfall and crash in several years now, probably since the pandemic back in 2020. So the idea really is that, and this is the part that's going to be a little bit opinionated, so the idea really is that a lot of people have been wondering where I see the stock market going into the future. And I will say this to just start off is that I'm not a crystal ball. I don't know the future. Nobody knows the future for sure. Not even Donald Trump knows the future. But if I had to guess, is that a lot of the direction of the stock market is going to be very, very dependent now on the future plans that Donald Trump announces, as well as what he actually physically does. Because sometimes he announces plans, but then he goes back on his word. Then sometimes he presses forward. But the idea is that if Donald Trump really does continue his tariff policies, if he really does start to fight back with even more tariffs, then the real prediction that I personally have, and this part's a little bit opinionated, so if you guys appreciate that, I don't know, maybe like this video or just leave a comment to support it. But the idea is that I do believe that the stock market is very, very probable that it's going to get worse before it gets better. In terms of what is the best move from there, it really, really depends on your risk tolerance. If you are someone that wants to play it safe, then I would say that if you also predict that the stock market is going to get worse. Again, we're not saying it's going to get worse, but we're saying if it gets worse, because this is a prediction. This is an opinionated piece. But the idea is that if it was truly to end up getting worse, then the idea is that it may be some time to maybe consider really trying to balance out your portfolio, to maybe switch into safer stocks. You can, if you are a little bit of a risk taker, look into shorting stocks or even buying puts. I know there are some people that if you're truly particularly trying to chase out the highest amount of risk but with the potential of the highest amount of gains, then look into buying puts. If you want to play it a little bit safer, then look into maybe just shorting stocks, so you don't have to be as sensitive when it comes to the timeline of when the fall actually happens. But if you truly want to be safe, then you can look into either just not cashing out per se, but just holding still and waiting for the recovery to happen, or buying even more if you really just want to just, make moves right now. Or the other option that you can look into is that you can look into buying puts, you can look into shorting the stock market, or you can look into just holding still for now and just waiting for the stock market to settle a little bit before you pull triggers to make more moves to buy. There are a lot of people that are talking to buy, but again, going back is that if you had to ask for my prediction, I do believe that there is still room for it to go down even further. And if that really becomes the case, buying may not necessarily be the smartest move, unless again you're trying to be truly like you really just have that urgency to really want to buy, then feel free. But that's just my personal thoughts about it, at least when it comes to the stock market. Now, turning on to talk a little bit about the labor market, and this one's very, very important and very relevant because there's a lot of people I know that are either out of work right now, afraid to be out of work, or they're just still working, but they want to build in their career, and they're very afraid that this economy is going to maybe lead to some kind of plateau in their career right now. Now, it is expected that because, again, we know that the stock, not the stock market, the labor market, because we know that the economy is not doing very well, it is very, very probable to think that the labor market and unemployment and everything in that world is going to get worse for the foreseeable future. And this is just logic in a lot of ways. Like if the economy is not doing well, the logic behind this is that businesses will struggle. If businesses struggle, they will be hesitant to hire. If they are hesitant to hire, people are going to cling to their jobs very, very tightly because they don't want to leave a job that, they're afraid to potentially lose, especially during these economic times. And if this ends up happening, then the labor market is going to take a very, very massive hit, which is probably a great segue to talking a little bit about the last thing that or the final thing that I really want to talk about, how this is going to potentially impact us and our economy, is going to be everything related to inflation. At the end of the day, most people already know by now. If you've been following this channel, huge thanks for the support throughout these years or months or weeks, depending on how long you've been subscribed. But the idea is that we've talked a lot about how tariffs are inflationary. They are an inflationary policy. The more Trump implements his tariffs, the more inflation is expected to rise up and happen again. So if this really does end up happening, what's going to happen is that, especially with this massive increase in tariff and costs and percentages, is that a lot of companies are, simply put, they're going to pass down these costs onto the consumer, people like you and I. And if that ultimately ends up happening, then it is expected that, yes, sadly, the sad news to share is that things such as like groceries, clothing, goods, manufacturing, everything in that world, prices are expected to increase even further than they already have. Of course, we just have to ultimately see what ends up happening in terms of like what, not necessarily how tariffs are going to impact, because we already know how tariffs are going to impact our economy, but more about what Donald Trump actually announces and what he actually maybe not necessarily announces, but also what he retracts back. Does he ultimately go through with even more of his tariff policies? Does he ultimately end up maybe retracting and turning, back on his word about a lot of the things that happen? We just have to see in one of the future episodes of The Kevin Show. So with that being said, that's pretty much what I really just wanted to share in today's update. So if you guys found that relatively insightful, thank you guys for watching all the way to the end. As always, like, comment any thoughts, predictions, personal stuff if you guys want to, thoughts about anything, and like and subscribe, hit the bell, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.